All right, so I'm being very vulnerable with my own house today. I have an expert here that is testing for mold, and he's going through with all of his gadgets to check all of my areas of my house to see where we have problems. Ben, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Ben Coons with Golden Environmental, and we're here inspecting this home. I brought my full toolbox of mold sampling gear to give this home a thorough mold investigation.
So Ben, where do you want to start first when you're looking for mold?
Well, I guess my favorite area is to kind of start from the basement, because I really find that tells a lot of the history of a home, whether there's been past water intrusions or elevated moisture. It also tends to have less ventilation and maybe a little dustier than other areas of the home. So it's a great spot to begin to try and find mold in the home. Another important part about finding mold in the basement or crawl space is that up to 40% of the air in your home actually originates from those areas, and again makes it up to the home through the HVAC system or the stack effect where air is rushing up the stairwell. So again, the air quality and hygiene of our basements and crawl spaces becomes really important.
Great, so we're going to dive in pretty deep here. We're in our basement, and he's going to use his thermal imaging and his ground testing for humidity just to find those weak spots in the envelope, and because usually those are the areas, right, that we're going to find most of the mold.
Absolutely, yeah. We're kind of doing a scan of the building envelope with a thermal imaging camera to begin with, and that's going to show us thermal abnormalities that may be promoting condensation or possibly an active water intrusion. If whether the wax ring around the toilet was leaking or there was an unknown plumbing intrusion, we might be able to identify that with the camera as well.
Great, so this is my house. This is the first house that I built, and so I'm gonna get graded, right? And we're gonna see how it goes. So stay tuned. We're gonna go through some more steps on what he's doing here. All right, so we are in my daughter's room, which is in the basement, and it's not a fully submerged basement, right? We kind of extended the foundation up, so this is looking outside, and she's got her big window here, and we found a little areas where we thought that there was a little bit of moisture buildup. So Ben is testing with his thermal gun, and Ben, what type of gun are you using, just so they can see?
Yeah, so I have a FLIR thermal imaging camera. So again, this lets me look for changes in temperature that could indicate, and today what we're looking for is moisture, obviously. So
okay.
Here we can see the colder surfaces of this window well, or obviously the window frame and the areas near it, where the wall and some of the other materials are much warmer.
Okay. And what device do you have on the window there?
On the window, I have a hygrometer, which is measuring the relative humidity, and it's actually able to calculate the dew point temperature. So dew point is the temperature at which moisture from the air, humidity in the air, is going to condense on surfaces. So
what temperatures are we looking at there in Fahrenheit?
Yeah.
What's the translation?
In this instance, the dew point temperature would be a cooler temperature. So the coldest temperature that I have in this frame is 9.3 degrees, right around there in that window frame, and that's where we're noticing some dark discoloration that we suspect could be mold growth.
Okay.
When we look at our hygrometer here, we see that we have a 55.6% humidity. And the dew point just jumped a little bit, but is 10.3 degrees.
Okay.
So point being here that we're coming very, very close to achieving dew point temperature in this home, and that's why we're growing mold on this wooden windowsill. We have moisture and household dust collecting on an area that's not ventilated and maybe not cleaned or dusted, maybe the best. So we have kind of probably most likely a common household mold growth on it, like Cladosporium or maybe Aspergillus penicillium.
Okay, and how prevalent is this in just everybody's house?
Well, again, anybody's home that has a cool window with a high humidity from indoor living, from cooking, from bathing, from sleeping, all these activities generate moisture that can condense on window frames, window surfaces, and that moisture basically settles on the horizontal surfaces of the window meets that dust and can promote that mold growth. So
Okay.
Keeping the relative humidity down in your home with by ventilation or a dehumidification system, and maintaining household cleanliness just through vacuuming and dusting can really help if you're noticing mold on your windowsills.
Great. All right. Well, let's get checking other areas then. Ceiling look good.
Looks pretty uniform. You know, you're talking about how you insulated everything. When you don't see large anomalies, it kind of means conformity in the building material, conformity in the insulation. So often I'll see all sorts of random cold spots and
insulation settled, or
absolutely ancient cellulose insulation and attics that's settled,
Yeah,
and you'll see
yeah,
all
yeah.
those spots. Yeah. But yeah, just kind of looking around. I'm not necessarily expecting anything in this ceiling, but just kind of confirming. So
yeah, and the bottom of the window, don't see much.
all looks good. Just kinds of shows that where you see that discoloration does tend to be the colder temperatures there.
All right, so now we're in my workout room.
So we're just kind of looking at these same window sills, and see we're getting it's still the same phenomenon. The window sills or window frames are cooler, but a little bit warmer. I mean, this is 3 degrees warmer in here. So,
Well, we got the sun against it right
yes,
now,
there you
so
go. The aspects coming into play. So let's see what the dew point temperature is saying over here. Again, it's 9.6 degrees. Our relative humidity didn't change too much. 55.2%, 9.6 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
Actively moisture. I have something. This is great for thermal abnormalities, but really to confirm moisture, I have a moisture meter that I use. So if I were to see something that I suspected was wet with this, I would want to confirm it with an actual moisture meter.
Okay.
So we can kind of see one of those here in a second. Maybe I'll go grab it. So this is a Survey Master moisture meter. So it's actually capable of calibrating the material. So if I'm measuring wood or another material, it'll adjust its scale. But I always kind of like to get like a baseline reading of something that I don't think is wet. So for instance, clear out here on the window frame, I don't think is very wet. So a baseline of 110, 114. Now let's go to an area that maybe we would suspect could be possibly wet, and see if we get any different moisture measurements. So 133. So really that's pretty negligible. It's nothing to maybe indicate an active water intrusion, but it does show that just small amount of difference there. 126 there, 96 over here. So nowhere near enough for my moisture meter to interpret that as a wet building material, but it is kind of slightly elevated. So another fun area to use this in basements is kind of around the lower portion where the egress window might leak if we didn't have a drain, or if it wasn't properly flashed. If it was actively leaking, we might have some moisture underneath the window. So I like to check right at the sides, the corners of the window, excuse me, and then obviously lower where gravity would actually carry some of that moisture.
Okay. And then maybe over by the outlet where some of the
again,
the electrical lines may have penetrated through and created an air leakage.
Yeah, see if there's any elevated moisture there. But
What's
for
it
the most
saying?
part, nothing's elevated, wet-wise. Here we're kind of a baseline of 100.
Okay.
And then here we're getting 120, 116.
Okay.
So again, all dry building materials, and that makes sense. I'm not seeing any evidence of water intrusion or water damage. Again, just basic condensation on windows.
And it maybe helps with this window because we have the register directly above that, to where the other window it was slightly farther away just due to being able to route that.
Yeah, that's a strong point. That's really going to help with the ventilation, that it's moving air right above this window. So very good point.
All right. On the next place. So what are you looking for now?
Well, just any sort of evidence of water intrusion. So sometimes, with this, sometimes I can see bubbling or cracking in the paint, or runs in the paint, and that can indicate, again, leaking, past leaking. It might not be wet now, but maybe it did previously and grew mold growth. So any evidence of past water intrusion is something I want to look for and be aware of to maybe collect a sample. So again, this is really looking pretty good. I see one kind of small linear stain there. Can you see how my flashlight kind of
Yeah,
highlights that a little bit? But
that might that might also be some paint overlap.
yeah, so, and that's so common, right? Like there can be small things like that, seams in building materials. So I really like to look for, you know, a couple pieces of evidence before I start drilling a hole or taking something apart. So in this case, you know, we might, if I were to see where that base trim had popped, or the caulking or the joint there had cracked, or
Right.
again, any other damage, bubbling, peeling, that sort of thing, then I would feel very inclined to take a sample from this wall cavity. But this one, I'm just not seeing the evidence here. It looks like a really
Okay.
well-constructed basement window. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
All right, so you got a little tape sample to...
Yes, I just collected a tape sample from a surface here in the mechanical room, and I think that'll be helpful because I'm getting ready to collect an air sample. So if I find elevated mold in that air sample, I want to try and have some evidence of where I think it might be coming from. And a lot of times that might be a water damaged material, or again, a material that's collected a lot of dust and potentially mold spores. So here in this mechanical room, I was able to get up kind of in an area that's probably not cleaned very often and collect some dust and possibly a discoloration from the floor joist there. So if we do find elevated mold in this sample or in the air sample, we have an idea of knowing where we need to clean, what we need to clean.
Yeah. I know there was a little bit of a problem with that wall back there because it was above grade. How concerned are you with the wall at the service panel?
Well, yes, absolutely. That's a little bit more obvious to me that it's certainly mold growth. So yes, I would think this would be another area that we would potentially pick up some mold from the kind of aggressive air sample that I'm going to collect. But usually when I see this kind of discoloration on block, I commonly assume it to be mold growth. But one good thing about this home that I checked was there's no mold growth on the paper legend inside the electrical junction box. So, you know, every home has a basement with an electrical junction box, or I should say every home has an electrical junction box with a paper legend inside of it. And this paper is just preferred mold food. So if we've had a lot of mold in the basement and mold spores have made it into that junction box, I really expect to see some mold growth on this panel, so or on this legend. So in this particular basement, we're not seeing any of that growth on the legend today. So that's good news.
Yeah. All right, so what do we got here?
Well, this is a calibrated air pump here. So this is what I use to collect what we refer to as air samples, but really it's actually a dust sample as well. It's just collecting the aerosolized dust or particulate that's suspended in the air. So inside this plastic cartridge, what we call a mold cassette, is a slide that can be removed for microscopic analysis. So the design of this cartridge is built in a way that is going to kind of prevent impacting with larger particulate in the air and focus on some of the particles that we're concerned in the indoor air quality world. So things like mold, dander, pollen, all those sorts of things can be caught with one of these mold cartridges, these cassettes. So
Okay,
again,
so there's a certain micron level that has to get through that to show
yeah,
up.
it uses
Okay.
like a physical effect to kind of spin the air, vortex the air in there,
Okay.
and kind of focuses the mold size particles, and then again this the sizes of concern onto this slide
yeah.
here for analysis. And because I'm using a calibrated pump, we can start to extrapolate how many spores would be present in a cubic meter of air. So
Okay.
that's where the pump comes into play. So.
Now, how long does this process take?
Well, I send these away to an accredited lab for microscopic analysis. I don't do the work myself, but I use overnight mail, and I typically have lab results the following day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And while this machine is running, how quick can it collect samples?
Yes, kind of depends on the environment for how long I'll do a sampling time. 5 minutes is very common for me to do in an ambient air sample in a basement. If I'm doing a cavity or a confined space or a very dusty area, I might cut that back to 3 minutes. If it's an extremely clean room, I might bump it up to 10 minutes.
Okay.
The goal is to try and eliminate or limit the amount of excess particulate on the slide, what we call a background. If I collect too many unimportant pieces of dust and fragments on this sample, it'll obscure mold spores. So we're searching, really the goal here, the art here is to collect the right amount of dust, just enough dust to actually get mold in there and give us a representative idea of what's in the environment. But if it's too dusty, I'll cover the slide in a layer of dust that prevents it from being read correctly. So
awesome. All right. So how do you start it here?
Yeah, so I'll turn it on.
So she's pretty quiet.
It is very quiet. And then one other thing that I like to do, I mentioned I like to collect like an aggressive air sample. So I'm going to try and find either like the lid of a clean plastic container or something to disturb some of the air in here. So let me... moving things around, so I'm not trying to do too much, but I did want to maybe get some air off of that wall that you had pointed out. Starts out a little rough, but gets warmed up. So I'll let that run for 5 minutes in here.
All right, so 5 minutes is up, and that whole unit, you just cap that?
Yeah,
label
yeah.
it, and send that whole thing in?
Absolutely. I'll record this on a chain of custody and send this away to my accredited lab for analysis. But again, we'll know what kind of air we're breathing right now this time tomorrow. So.
Okay, and now how do they take the sample out of that then? Do they break that apart, or is there a disassembly of that?
Great question. Yeah, there's a seam right here underneath the sticker, the label here, so it essentially just gets cut in half.
Okay.
And exposes a disposable microscope slide inside there. Yeah.
Great. So pretty easy for them to get the sample.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Those are the ones we want to make sure you have the mask on. You know.
So you have this mask here, and I noticed you weren't wearing it here, but you feel like there's some houses you feel like you should be probably putting your mask on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's certain homes where I start to maybe detect the mold in areas where I know that I need to put it on immediately. So I'll do that when that's the case. I always put it on when I'm in a crawl space or an attic. That's kind of a no-brainer, but I don't necessarily wear it every last minute in the living room or the kitchen or just walking through the home. But
not a full hazmat suit while your customers are just walking around with nothing.
Yeah. There are sometimes where people will start disturbing mold or start wiping it, and I'm standing there and I almost feel like a deer in the headlights, though. Like, no, you can't do that. Like, we have to be careful with this, you know. So that's kind of funny sometimes too. Have
you ever come up to a home to where you're starting to walk through it and you're like, oh my gosh, these people should not be living here right now?
Unfortunately, there's been a couple of homes where I can detect mold visually and odors and just the number of areas, the pure number of areas starts to be concerning as well, you know. So maybe a home like that might have mold in the basement. They might have windows that were incorrectly installed, and we have significant mold growth in window and wall cavities. We might have a kitchen sink that has chronically leaked and has mold under the base cabinet. We might have issues with plumbing in the shower, or past water intrusions that have damaged building materials in the bathrooms. So when we start to have all these areas adding together, they can kind of contribute to an environment that might not be the best for some of those people to be there. So.
How do you break that to them?
Well, it's something, you know, I really want to consider discussing with the physician or whatnot, but I guess when I find very highly elevated levels of molds that are sometimes classified as toxic, such as, you know, Stachybotrys or Catonium, when we find really heavy levels of those in air samples and areas throughout the home, it makes it a little bit easier to say, you know, why don't you try staying in a hotel tonight, and if the family feels better in a couple days, you might have a lot of information right there. I can't tell you how often I've gotten phone calls from people where they've left that day, went and stayed at a hotel, had a change of clothing and a good shower, and all of a sudden they start to feel better. And so it all kind of clicks, like, wow, it really was my home. It wasn't in my mind, you know.
Yeah. So mold's a real thing.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yes, there's I cater to a population that's kind of considered mold sensitive, people that have different health ailments that might make them particularly sensitive to mold. So things like Lyme's disease, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. There's some neurological conditions like PANS and PANDAS that are really exacerbated by mold exposure. So those folks are kind of what I refer to as mold sensitive and kind of who I primarily help. But the fact of the matter is mold's inflammatory. It's an environmental, it's something negative in our environment that can cause inflammation. And as we all know, inflammation is a big part of the decline in modern health. So I don't think mold's really good for anybody to be exposed to at high levels or for long periods of time.
How important do you feel that new construction practices should be focusing on health and mold prevention?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important. I feel like modern building practices, one of the main goals is we're trying to achieve really tightly sealed, energy efficient homes. And I think that's terrific. I'm all about reducing energy and technology, that sort of thing. What that does, problem with that is that we're eliminating the amount of air that's being exchanged to our home, by creating them so tightly sealed. We don't have these natural drafts or gaps that are introducing fresh air into our homes. So if we have moisture problems and mold growth in a tightly sealed home, the occupants might be more likely to be exposed to those higher concentrations of mold because the home isn't as well ventilated. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really important.
From where you're at now and everybody that you're helping, you're wanting to take this a little bit farther and do this more on a bigger scale for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to see more people recognizing mold as a concern in their indoor environments. A lot of us are exercising more, improving our diets, and other environmental factors to be healthier. But what about the air that we're breathing when we're at home working and preparing meals, spending time with family, sleeping, all those things? So I'm getting more people to recognize how mold could hinder their air quality and how to fix it's certainly a passion of mine.
And so right now you have a lot of recommendations and referrals coming from a lot of doctors in the area.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very fortunate to have really solid referrals from some functional medicine practitioners and other doctors in the area. So those are exactly the kind of individuals that I like to help to be to do a full, thorough investigation of the entire home and identify all the sources of mold and educate them on how to fix it. That's really my pride and joy. Yeah.
So who do you work with primarily, and what service areas do you have right now?
Yeah, so primarily here in central Illinois. I don't typically find myself traveling too much further than 100 miles outside the Peoria kind of central Illinois area, but I go clear up into Iowa, over into Indiana, southern Illinois. I do travel, but not necessarily throughout the United States.
Okay. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Well, you can contact me on my website, goldenenvironmentalllc.com, or you could also find me on Facebook.
Okay. What is your Facebook tag?
Well, it's my name, so Benjamin.J. Coons.
Okay. All right. I'll put a link on the video here so that people can get that. What do people do when they first get a hold of you? What's the best information that you can get from them?
Oh, well, that's a really good question. So the first thing I like to do when I'm interviewing somebody or discussing a mold investigation with them is just try and piece together all the information about the home's mold or water history that I can. So, when we're really talking about mold, what we're really talking about is past water events. So any known instances where the basement flooded or the toilet overflowed or the kitchen sink backed up or something like that. All those can lead to elevated moisture that may have damaged building materials and promote mold growth in our areas that I'm concerned about. So kind of getting a general timeline of the home, idea of events, that's kind of one of the most important things. Occupants are incredibly good about knowing a lot of times where the areas of concern are. So often I find that females have a really strong sense of smell, and they know the corners of the house that smell musty or moldy or damp. And so often those areas that they're suspicious of are where we end up finding moisture or mold problem. So again, those daily observations that people collect can really be helpful in the mold investigation process. It's more than just collecting an air sample. It's more about developing a hypothesis, what's actually gone on in the home in the past, collecting data, and then providing information from it from there.
Great. All right, so we're at the tail end of the testing of my house. What's the next steps here before you take off?
Yeah, well, as mentioned, these samples will go for lab analysis, and then I'll send those to you as soon as I receive them. But in addition to the lab report, from me you get a detailed remediation guide that's going to analyze my observations and measurements today, and then make guidelines for any remediation that might be needed. So if I were to, for instance, find elevated mold in that mechanical room, I'll be providing recommendations for how that area needs to be contained, how negative air environmental controls need to be applied to contain it, how HEPA vacuuming and material needs to be done, how surfaces need to be sanitized, and how the air needs to be cleaned following all the removal work. So again, guidelines for remediation will be provided in my report.
So after they do all the remediations, is there a testing that you can do when you come back to check the remediations worked?
Yes, very, very good. There's a post-remediation verification test and inspection that I like to perform following any remediation activities. So I want to collect air samples and ensure that they should be much better than the ones originally collected, but really my criteria are even a little bit stronger than that. I'm looking for single-digit air spore counts and small to no amounts of Catonium or Stachybotrys. So that's what we would expect to see in a post-remediation verification air sample. As far as the visual inspection, I'm looking to make sure things like the containment were put into place and that negative air machines were used. I'm looking to see that HEPA vacuuming was performed effectively. I shouldn't be seeing dust and particulate on surfaces where we've had professionals come in and HEPA vacuum it. The other thing is I want to confirm is that the actual source of water intrusion has been taken care of and that any of the actual water damaged material has been removed. So often I come in to a remediation job where I stated drywall, water damaged moldy drywall needed to be removed, and somehow it's still built into the wall when I get there to perform the remediation testing. So again, it's more than just passing the air sample, it has to pass the visual examination as well.
All right, Ben, I appreciate you coming out and doing the testing for me. I'm excited to see the results, but also maybe not super excited to see the results. You know what I mean? But you can't trust anything that's not tested, right? So we're going to figure out what we have going on. Even if we don't want to know what it is, the best way to fix a problem is know that there is a problem. So that's what we're going to find out.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you.